Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of personality disorders. A topic I can tell you've given a lot of thought to, judging by this stack of research and articles. We're going to focus specifically on borderline, narcissistic, dependent, histrionic, schizoid, and paranoid personality disorders. So get ready to uncover some surprising insights into how these disorders are diagnosed, and maybe even challenge some of the assumptions you might have.
It's fascinating how much our understanding of these disorders has evolved. We've come a long way from simply labeling people as difficult or eccentric.
Right, and it's not just about being a little quirky. These are very real and often painful patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that can significantly impact a person's life. It's like their personality has become a roadblock to living a full life.
Exactly. The American Psychiatric Association, or APA, actually uses a kind of mental filing system to categorize these disorders. They call it the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, and it groups 10 personality disorders into 3 clusters.
It's like a roadmap to understanding the different ways these disorders can manifest. So tell me more about these clusters.
Well, you have cluster A, which is all about those who might seem odd or eccentric. That's where you find paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. Then there's cluster B, which is where things get a bit more dramatic and emotionally charged. Think antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. Finally, you have cluster C, which is characterized by anxiety and fearfulness, including avoidant, dependent, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorders.
So are you saying someone could fit into more than one of these categories?
It's definitely possible. These categories aren't always clear-cut, and there can be overlap between them. It's important to remember that these are just frameworks, and each person's experience is unique.
Okay, that makes sense. So should we dive into a specific disorder? I'm really curious about borderline personality disorder, especially since you mentioned it can be quite dramatic.
Absolutely. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, can be incredibly challenging, both for the individual experiencing it and for those around them. Imagine a life where your relationships are like roller coasters. Your emotions are super intense, and you struggle with a deep fear of abandonment.
That sounds incredibly difficult, and I remember reading that it's actually quite common, especially in psychiatric settings.
That's right. Studies suggest that it affects about 15% of individuals in those settings. And one of the hallmarks of BPD is this profound instability in relationships, emotions, and even self-image.
So it's more than just having mood swings.
Right. Imagine someone who experiences these sudden dramatic shifts in their emotions, maybe engaging in self-harm, or going to extreme lengths to avoid real or imagined abandonment. The term borderline itself actually has a somewhat controversial history. It was initially used to describe patients who seemed to fall somewhere between neurosis and psychosis, like they didn't fit neatly into either category. But as our understanding of mental health has evolved, the term has taken on a new meaning.
So where does BPD come from? What causes this emotional roller coaster?
Like many mental health conditions, it likely arises from a complex interplay of genetic predisposition and life experiences. Trauma, especially during childhood, can be a major trigger. Imagine a child who experiences abuse or neglect. Those early experiences can create a vulnerability that makes someone more susceptible to developing BPD later in life.
That's heartbreaking. But is there any hope for people with BPD? Are there effective treatments?
Absolutely. While BPD can be very challenging, it's definitely not a life sentence. Therapies like dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, have shown remarkable promise in helping individuals regulate their emotions, build healthier coping skills, and improve their relationships.
That's encouraging. It sounds like DBT gives them the tools to navigate those intense emotions and build a more stable life.
Okay.
So we've explored the tumultuous world of BPD. Now, I'm curious to delve into another personality disorder that often makes headlines: narcissistic personality disorder. Have you ever met someone who seems a bit too in love with themselves?
You've probably encountered the stereotype, the person who's completely self-absorbed, constantly fishing for compliments, and seems to lack empathy for others. That's often the image that comes to mind when we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD.
And it makes me think of the myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. It's like the name of the disorder perfectly captures that sense of being enamored with oneself.
It's a very fitting comparison. The APA actually lays out 9 specific criteria for diagnosing NPD. Think about someone with a grandiose sense of self-importance who fantasizes about unlimited success, power, beauty, or ideal love. They might believe they're special and unique, require excessive admiration, exploit others, and have a fragile ego that's easily bruised by criticism.
So it's more than just being vain or self-centered. It sounds deeply rooted in their personality. But what causes this inflated sense of self? Where does NPD come from?
Like all personality disorders, it's likely a combination of factors. Genetics might play a role, but childhood experiences can also contribute. Imagine a child who grows up receiving either excessive praise or excessive criticism. These experiences can shape their sense of self and their expectations of others, potentially leading to NPD.
So NPD could develop as a way to protect a fragile sense of self.
That's one theory. And it highlights the importance of understanding the underlying vulnerability that often exists beneath that seemingly impenetrable facade of grandiosity.
Now, I've heard that NPD can be difficult to treat. Is there any hope for people with this disorder?
You're right, it can be challenging because individuals with NPD often struggle to acknowledge they have a problem. But there is hope. Psychotherapy can be incredibly helpful in helping them develop more realistic expectations of themselves and others, learn to value the needs and feelings of those around them, and ultimately build healthier relationships.
So it's about helping them see beyond their own reflection and connect with the world in a more genuine and compassionate way. That's really encouraging.
Well, we've talked about the highs of grandiosity and the lows of instability. Now, I'm curious to explore a personality disorder that seems to fall on the opposite end of the spectrum, dependent personality disorder.
Dependent personality disorder, or DPD, is characterized by a pervasive and excessive need to be taken care of. Imagine someone who has difficulty making even simple decisions without seeking reassurance from others, who feels helpless when alone, and who goes to great lengths to avoid conflict or disapproval.
So it's like they've outsourced their decision-making to someone else.
In a way,
Yes.
they have a deep-seated fear of being alone and feel incapable of managing their own lives. This need for reassurance and guidance can become so intense that it completely overwhelms their sense of self.
That sounds incredibly debilitating. What are the roots of this extreme reliance on others? Like all personality disorders, DPD likely stems from a combination of factors, often rooted in early childhood experiences. Overprotective parenting, a childhood illness that fostered dependence, insecure attachment styles, or even social humiliation during those formative years can all contribute to the development of DPD.
It's like their sense of self-reliance never had a chance to blossom. But just like BPD and MPD, is there hope for people with DPD? Can they learn to stand on their own 2 feet?
Absolutely. Psychotherapy, particularly approaches that focus on building assertiveness, improving decision-making skills, and coping with anxiety, can be incredibly helpful. It's about empowering them to take control of their lives and develop the confidence to navigate the world independently.
That's fantastic. It sounds like therapy helps them rewrite the narrative of their lives, moving from dependence to independence. Okay, so we've covered BPD, NPD, and DPD. Our deep dives wouldn't be complete without exploring another personality disorder known for its dramatic flair, histrionic personality disorder.
Yes. Histrionic Personality Disorder, or HPD, often makes a grand entrance. Imagine someone who thrives on being the center of attention, who's always on stage with their dramatic displays of emotion and a flair for the theatrical.
It's like they're always auditioning for the lead role in the play of life.
Exactly. They crave the spotlight and might dress provocatively, exaggerate their emotions, and tell dramatic stories to captivate their audience. But beneath this theatrical exterior, there's often a deep need for approval and a fragile sense of self-worth. It's like they constantly need validation from others to feel good about themselves.
It's not just about being a drama queen or drama king. There's a deeper vulnerability at play.
You're absolutely right. They might fish for compliments, get upset when they're not the center of attention, and have difficulty forming genuine and lasting relationships because their interactions often feel superficial and performative.
I'm curious, though. Is it more common in women, as some stereotypes suggest?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Historically, HPD has been diagnosed more frequently in women, but there's growing recognition that this could be due to societal biases rather than actual prevalence. When structured assessments are used, the rates of diagnosis appear to be similar in both men and women.
That's an important point to remember. It highlights how societal expectations and gender stereotypes can influence how we perceive and diagnose mental health conditions.
Yeah.
So, for someone struggling with HPD, is there a path to a less dramatic and more authentic life?
Absolutely. Therapy, Especially long-term psychodynamic therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy can be very effective in helping individuals with HPD develop a stronger sense of self, learn to regulate their emotions in a healthier way, and build more genuine and less performative relationships. It's about helping them find their true voice and create a life where they don't need constant validation from an audience to feel valuable.
That sounds incredibly empowering.
I know.
For our next personality disorder, we're going to shift gears and enter a world of quiet detachment. Let's explore Schizoid Personality Disorder.
Schizoid Personality Disorder, or SPD, is characterized by a detachment from social relationships and a restricted range of emotional expression. Think of the classic loner stereotype, someone who prefers solitary activities, avoids social interactions, and has limited emotional expression.
It sounds like the opposite of someone with HPD. While someone with HPD craves the spotlight, people with SPD seem to prefer the shadows. But is it simply introversion?
It's a great observation, but it's important to understand that SPD goes beyond just introversion. Individuals with SPD genuinely lack interest in social connections, even with family members. They might seem indifferent to praise or criticism and find it difficult to experience and express emotions. Their lives often seem aimless or directionless because they lack the drive for social engagement that fuels many of us.
Yeah, it's not just a preference for solitude, it's a fundamental detachment from the social world.
Exactly. They're not choosing isolation out of shyness or social anxiety. They simply don't desire the same level of connection that most people do. Their inner world is often richer and more engaging to them than the complexities of human interaction.
That's fascinating. Now, I'm curious about how common SPD is. Do we have any insights from the research you've reviewed?
That's a tricky one, because people with SPD rarely seek treatment. It's difficult to accurately assess its prevalence, however. Some studies suggest that it might be more common in men and in those with a family history of schizophrenia.
So, even though we don't have exact numbers, we know it's out there. And if someone is living with this disorder, is there a way for them to find more connection and meaning in life if they want to?
There is. As with other personality disorders, psychotherapy is the primary treatment approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy and group therapy can be especially helpful for people with SPD. The goal is to help them develop coping mechanisms for social situations, improve their communication skills, and even discover hidden desires for connection they might not be aware of.
So, it's about gently guiding them out of their self-imposed isolation and helping them find their place in the world, if that's what they choose.
Yes, it's about respecting their individuality and empowering them to make choices that align with their unique needs and desires. Speaking of feeling isolated and disconnected, I think it's time we explore a personality disorder that often evokes feelings of unease and distrust. Paranoid personality disorder.
Paranoid personality disorder, or PPD, definitely has a reputation.
Yeah.
The person who's always suspicious of others sees hidden motives everywhere and struggles to trust anyone. But how is it different from the paranoia that might occur in other mental illnesses?
That's an important distinction. While paranoia can be a symptom of various conditions in PPD, it's a core feature of their personality. It's a persistent and deeply ingrained pattern that colors their perception of the world and their interactions with others.
So it's like they're constantly on guard, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But what causes this intense distrust?
Like many personality disorders, the causes of PPD are complex and likely multifaceted. Research suggests a possible genetic link. As PPD is more common in individuals with a family history of schizophrenia, early childhood experiences, especially trauma or abuse, can also contribute to the development of PPD. It's as if those early experiences create a blueprint for distrust that they carry with them into adulthood.
So, if someone is living with PPD, is there a way for them to let down their guard and find some peace of mind? Is therapy even possible when you're so deeply distrustful of others?
Those are great questions. And you've hit upon one of the biggest challenges in treating PPD, establishing trust with the therapist. It's often a slow and delicate process requiring patience, empathy, and a willingness to work at the client's pace.
It sounds like the therapist has to earn their trust every step of the way. But what are some of the therapeutic approaches that have shown promise?
Cognitive therapy, for example, can be helpful in challenging those deeply ingrained negative beliefs about others and helping them develop more realistic and less threatening interpretations of social situations. It's about helping them see the world through a less suspicious lens and recognize that not everyone is out to get them.
So, it's about helping them find a sense of safety and security in a world that feels inherently dangerous. It's incredibly important work.
Well, we've explored 6 different personality disorders and covered a lot of ground. I'm curious, though, are there any personality disorders that aren't officially recognized in the DSM but are still important to understand?
That's a great question, and it highlights how our understanding of mental health is constantly evolving. There are actually a couple of personality disorders that are mentioned in the research you provided that aren't included in the current version of the DSM, but they're still worth discussing. Depressive personality disorder and passive-aggressive personality disorder.
Okay, let's dive into those. What exactly is depressive personality disorder? Depressive personality disorder, as the name suggests, is characterized by a pervasive pattern of depressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Imagine someone who's constantly pessimistic, self-critical, and has difficulty experiencing joy or pleasure.
So, it's like they're carrying a heavy cloud of sadness with them wherever they go.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like their default setting is sadness, and this pervasive negativity can make it very challenging for them to form and maintain relationships, as their pessimism and self-criticism can be emotionally draining for those around them.
That makes sense. And what about passive-aggressive personality disorder? What does that look like?
Passive-aggressive personality disorder, sometimes called negativistic personality disorder, is all about expressing negative feelings indirectly. Instead of openly addressing their anger or resentment, they might procrastinate, be stubborn, sulk, or make critical remarks disguised as humor.
So, it's like they're expressing their anger through these subtle acts of defiance or resistance.
Exactly. They might forget to do a task or do it poorly on purpose, all while denying any hostile intent. This can create a lot of tension and frustration in relationships because their behavior can be incredibly confusing and difficult to address.
I can imagine. It's like trying to navigate a minefield of subtle digs and indirect expressions of anger. Now, are therapy and treatment options available for people with depressive personality disorder and passive-aggressive personality disorder, even though they're not officially recognized in the DSM?
Absolutely. Psychotherapy can be very helpful in addressing the underlying issues that contribute to these disorders. For depressive personality disorder, therapy might focus on challenging those negative thought patterns and helping them develop strategies for experiencing more joy and pleasure in life. For passive-aggressive personality disorder, the focus might be on helping them develop more assertive communication skills and learning to express their feelings directly.
So, it's about finding healthier ways to cope with difficult emotions and building more fulfilling relationships.
That's a really hopeful message. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm struck by a common thread running through all of these personality disorders: the difficulty in forming and maintaining healthy relationships.
That's a brilliant observation, and it highlights why understanding these disorders is so crucial. At their core, they're all about how we relate to ourselves and the world around us. They impact our ability to connect with others, communicate our needs, regulate our emotions, and navigate conflict.
So it's not just about individual quirks or eccentricities. It's about the fundamental ways we interact with others.
Exactly. And when those connections are strained or broken, it can lead to a great deal of suffering, both for the individual with the disorder and for those in their lives.
That's why therapy is so important. It provides a safe and supportive space for individuals to explore their relationship patterns, develop healthier coping mechanisms, and ultimately build more fulfilling connections with others. It is. Therapy is about more than just managing symptoms. It's about empowering individuals to live more authentically, connect more deeply, and create more meaningful lives. And, while we've been discussing personality disorders in a clinical way, it's important to remember each person's experience is unique.
That's so true. It's like those clusters and diagnostic criteria provide a framework, but the lived experience of a personality disorder is as individual as a fingerprint.
Exactly. And that's another reason why therapy is so essential. It's about understanding the person's unique story, their struggles, their strengths, and their goals. It's about meeting them where they are and helping them create a path toward a richer, more fulfilling life.
You've touched on something really important there. It's not about fixing someone, but about helping them find their own way.
Yeah.
Going back to those DSM clusters for a second, I noticed avoidant personality disorder is grouped with anxious and fearful disorders. To me,
Yeah.
it seems like it would have some overlap with schizoid personality disorder too.
That's a keen observation. And you've hit upon one of the complexities of diagnosing personality disorders. There's often a lot of nuance and overlap between them. While both avoidant personality disorder and schizoid personality disorder involve social withdrawal, the underlying motivations are quite different.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little. What distinguishes avoidant personality disorder from schizoid personality disorder?
Individuals with avoidant personality disorder actually crave social connection. They want to be close to others and build relationships. but they're held back by an intense fear of rejection, humiliation, or criticism. So they withdraw to protect themselves from potentially painful
It's
experiences.
like they're so afraid of getting hurt that they build walls around their hearts to keep everyone out.
That's a really powerful image, and it gets right to the heart of their experience. They're not choosing isolation out of indifference, they're choosing it out of self-preservation.
That makes a lot of sense. So,
Yeah.
while someone with schizoid personality disorder might be content in their solitude, someone with avoidant personality disorder is likely experiencing a great deal of inner turmoil and longing.
Exactly. It's this inner turmoil that often brings them into therapy. They want to break free from their isolation, but they need help to overcome their fears and develop the confidence to put themselves out there.
It's less about teaching them how to socialize and more about helping them feel safe enough to connect.
Yes. And therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy can be very effective. It helps them challenge their negative thoughts, build social skills, and gradually expose themselves to social situations in a safe and supportive environment.
That sounds like a really empowering process.
Mhm.
We've talked about obsessive compulsive personality disorder a bit, but I think it deserves a little more attention. After all, I think we all have those moments where we want things to be just so.
You're absolutely right. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD, is often misunderstood, and it's really important to distinguish it from obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD.
Okay, so what's the difference? They both sound like they involve a lot of, well, obsession and compulsion.
The key difference lies in the nature of the obsessions and compulsions. In OCD, people experience intrusive, unwanted thoughts and feel compelled to perform rituals to alleviate the anxiety those thoughts trigger. Think of someone who's constantly washing their hands or checking the locks. In OCPD, however, it's more about a pervasive preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control.
So it's less about specific rituals and more about a general rigidity in how they approach life.
Exactly. People with OCPD might be excessively devoted to work, have trouble relaxing, and hold themselves and others to impossibly high standards. They might be very detail-oriented, have trouble delegating tasks, and struggle to let go of things, even if those things are no longer serving them.
It sounds like they're always striving for an unattainable level of perfection, which I imagine can be incredibly frustrating, both for themselves and for the people around them. What's at the root of this need for control?
Well, the causes of OCPD, like other personality disorders, are thought to be a complex interplay of genetic and environmental factors. Some experts believe that early childhood experiences, particularly those that emphasize structure, order, and high achievement, can play a role.
So it's like their need for control is a learned response to their early environment.
It's a possibility, and it's important to remember that not everyone who grows up in a highly structured environment will develop OCPD. There are likely other factors at play, including temperament and genetic predisposition.
So is there a way for someone with OCPD to loosen their grip on control and find more flexibility and joy in life?
There is. Psychotherapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, can be very effective in helping individuals with OCPD challenge their rigid thought patterns, learn to delegate, and practice letting go of the need for absolute perfection. It's about helping them find a balance between structure and spontaneity.
That's a really great way to put it. It's about embracing the beauty of imperfection, both in themselves and in the world around them.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about a couple of personality disorders that aren't officially recognized in the DSM but are mentioned in some of the research you brought: depressive personality disorder and passive-aggressive personality disorder.
Yes. Those are interesting cases. And they highlight the ever-evolving nature of how we understand and classify personality disorders. Depressive personality disorder, as the name suggests, is characterized by a pervasive pattern of depressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Imagine someone who's constantly pessimistic, self-critical, and has difficulty experiencing joy or pleasure.
It sounds like they're carrying a heavy cloud of sadness with them wherever they go.
Exactly. And it's important to distinguish this from major depressive disorder, which is an episodic illness. Depressive personality disorder is more of a chronic state, a defining aspect of their personality.
So it's like their default setting is sadness. And how does this impact their relationships with others?
It can make it very challenging for them to form and maintain fulfilling relationships. Their pessimism and self-criticism can be draining for those around them, and they might struggle to see the positive aspects of their interactions.
That makes sense. And what about passive-aggressive personality disorder? It sounds like a roundabout way of expressing anger.
It is. Passive-aggressive personality disorder, also known as negativistic personality disorder, involves a pattern of expressing negative feelings indirectly, often through procrastination, stubbornness, or deliberate inefficiency.
So instead of directly confronting a conflict, they might forget to do a task or do it poorly on purpose.
You got it. It's a way of expressing their anger or resentment without directly addressing the issue. This behavior can create a lot of tension and frustration in relationships because it's often confusing and difficult to deal with.
It sounds like it would be exhausting to try to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
For those who are struggling with either depressive personality disorder or passive-aggressive personality disorder, is therapy an option, even though they're not officially recognized in the DSM?
Absolutely. Psychotherapy can be very helpful in addressing the underlying issues that contribute to these disorders. For depressive personality disorder, therapy might focus on challenging those negative thought patterns and helping them develop strategies for experiencing more joy and pleasure in life.
It's like helping them find a ray of sunshine in their perpetually cloudy world.
Exactly. And for passive-aggressive personality disorder, therapy might focus on helping them develop more assertive communication skills and learning to express their feelings directly and constructively.
So, it's about helping them find their voice and use it to communicate their needs and boundaries. Now, as we wrap up this exploration of personality disorders, I'm struck by how much our understanding of mental health has evolved. Host, speaker. We're moving away from simple labels and embracing the complexity of human experience.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the most important takeaways from our deep dive today. These disorders are not simply categories or diagnoses. They represent a spectrum of human experience, and each person's journey is unique.
That's such an important reminder. It's about seeing the person behind the disorder, understanding their struggles, and offering them support and compassion as they navigate the challenges of life.
Well said. And it's about recognizing that these disorders are not fixed or immutable. With the right support and therapeutic interventions, people can and do experience significant growth and healing. They can learn to manage their symptoms, build healthier relationships, and create lives filled with meaning and purpose.
That's a truly inspiring message. And it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for growth and transformation, even in the face of adversity. I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. But before we move on to the final part, I want to leave our listener with something to ponder. We've talked a lot about the challenges of personality disorders, but what if we shifted our perspective a bit? What if we viewed these disorders not as flaws or weaknesses, but as adaptations?
That's a fascinating proposition. What do you mean by adaptations?
I'm thinking about how these patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, while often causing pain and distress, might have initially developed as ways to cope with difficult or even traumatic experiences. They might have been attempts to protect oneself to survive, to navigate challenging circumstances.
That's a really intriguing perspective. It shifts the focus from pathology to resilience, from brokenness to resourcefulness. Instead of simply labeling these patterns as maladaptive, we can ask ourselves what purpose they might have served. How did they help the individual navigate their world, especially during those crucial developmental years?
Exactly. And maybe by understanding the function these adaptations served, we can start to unravel the underlying needs that weren't being met. Perhaps someone developed a narcissistic personality as a way to compensate for feelings of inadequacy or a lack of validation early on. Or maybe someone with avoidant personality disorder learned to withdraw as a way to protect themselves from criticism or rejection.
That's a really compassionate approach, and it opens up a whole new avenue for treatment. Instead of trying to eliminate or suppress these adaptations, we can help individuals find healthier and more effective ways to get those needs met.
It's like saying, hey, I see you, I understand why you develop these patterns, and I'm here to help you find new ways to cope, to connect, and to thrive. It's about empowering them to write a new chapter in their story, one where those old adaptations are no longer necessary.
Beautifully said. It's about fostering a sense of agency, helping them realize they have the power to choose how they respond to the world around them. And it's about recognizing that healing and growth are lifelong journeys, not destinations.
Well, this deep dive into personality disorders has been incredibly insightful. I feel like we've peeled back the layers of these often stigmatized conditions and discovered a core of shared humanity.
I completely agree. We all have our own unique ways of navigating the world, and sometimes those ways become so ingrained that they cause us pain or create barriers in our relationships. But there's always hope.
So for anyone listening who might be struggling with a personality disorder or who loves someone who is, please remember you're not alone. There are resources available, therapist support groups, online communities. There are people who understand and want to help.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to reach out for support. It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to acknowledge you need help.
And remember, recovery is possible. You can learn to manage your symptoms, build healthier relationships, and create a life that's full of joy, meaning, and connection.
Well said. On that note of